Good evening, everybody. Wishing you all a Céad Míle Fáilte from a very sunny Dublin. You're all very welcome to the third in the National Archives online public lecture series for 2022. I might wait another few seconds here because the virtual room is filling up. So my name is Elizabeth McAvoy. I'm the archivist with responsibility for education and outreach in the National Archives. And on behalf of the office, we're delighted to welcome you here tonight and also to welcome our guest speaker, Sandra Doble, who will present on researching your family history using Church of Ireland records. Before we get started, or before we begin in earnest, I'd like to go through just a few housekeeping details so that you can engage more fully with our event. Audience cameras are off and mics are muted, but we actively encourage your participation in tonight's talk using the webinar's Q&A function, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Sandra's talk will run for just inside an hour, roughly, with a time at the end for Q&A. You'll have the opportunity to submit your questions during the talk, so please do put them in the chat box at the bottom of the control panel, because the chat box will actually be disabled for the course of the lecture. We'll accommodate as many questions as time permits, so apologies in advance if we don't get around to answering yours. And for topics which have, enjoy such huge popularity as tonight's topic, we anticipate that there will be quite a few questions. So a pause in advance if yours isn't picked. We're recording this webinar and we will make it available after tonight's event on our YouTube channel, as we have done with all our talks since February of last year. So keep an eye on our website and on our Twitter feed, where we will notify you when the talk is available to view as a recording. We'll also be live tweeting the event this evening, just a few tweets. So if you could please like them if you already follow us on Twitter, and if you don't follow us on Twitter, please do at NAR Ireland. So a few words about tonight's talk. Sandra's lecture will introduce a brief history and examination of population figures of the Church of Ireland community in Ireland. It will cover records of genealogical interest produced by parishes, such as church registers, vestry minute books, and so on. Access to these records will be outlined, and advice will be given by Sandra on using online transcriptions of baptisms, marriages, and burial records. The many sources of information which can be of value to those researching their Church of Ireland ancestors will also be discussed. Some of the examples of these are the Representative Church Body Library Manuscript Collection, the Church of Ireland Gazette, clerical biographies, school records, marriage licenses, and the Charlton Endowment Charitable Trust Fund marriage certificates, which will also be introduced and explained by Sandra. So now we will bring Sandra in here also in the gallery view. So I hope you can all see Sandra there. You're very, very welcome, Sandra. A few words about Sandra tonight. She spent her earlier working life as an ACCA accountant, but switched career to pursue her passion for family history. And I think it's fair to say that what has been accountancy's loss has certainly been family history's gain. She set up her own research company, Irish Family Footsteps, in 2012, and became a member of Accredited Genealogists Ireland in 2015. Sandra holds a diploma in family history research, a distinction awarded by independent colleges and the Institute of Commercial Management. In addition to research for clients, Sandra also works alongside her colleagues in the Genealogy Advisory Service run here in the National Archives, and she co-tutors and lectures for College City's Family History Diploma. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Sandra. Sandra, take it away.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm going to share my screen now and we'll start the lecture. Now, I hope that's all working for everybody. Thank you very much for your introduction, Elizabeth. I'll move straight on. Elizabeth's outlined the contents of my lecture very nicely for me, so I'm just going to move straight on to the first section of it, which is a little look at the background of the Church of Ireland, Church in Ireland, and then and population numbers. So the Church of Ireland began in Ireland, as it were, in 1536 as a Reformed Protestant church when the Irish Parliament declared Henry VIII as supreme head of the church. It became the established or state church and took control of all existing church property in the country. That has relevance for us in a number of ways as genealogists. One up, graveyards were taken over. Now, for the most part, that graveyard would be the only graveyard in the village or town. And so it was effectively the municipal graveyard.
So, sorry, Sandra, if I could just interrupt you very quickly.
Yes.
Could you expand the screen of the slides, please?
Is that better?
So that
doing anything?
There should be an enlargement button at the side of your slideshow, which should enable you to expand it so that it actually fits the screen.
Oh, more slideshow options. Let's see. Screen.
Yeah.
No. I see blank screen, white screen, show taskbar.
I can't control this, so
yeah. I'm afraid I don't see where it is, Elizabeth.
That's okay, Sandra. Maybe if you go to the box with that looks like a little computer, a second in from the right.
Yeah. Oh no, I probably lost everything there, did I?
Yeah, no, just go click that back again. And the one beside it to the right.
Yeah.
Is that going to give you, no, sorry.
No.
No, look, just please continue, Sandra. Apologies for that interruption.
Okay, and hopefully everybody will be able to read it anyway. So what I was going to say is that graveyards continue to be used by the entire community in a village. So sometimes you can take it for a lot of the time that there were Roman Catholic burials in what then became Church of Ireland graveyards. And sometimes those burials were recorded in burial registers, which is always worth remembering. Next, in ways that it matters to us that the Church of Ireland was the established church, the Church of Ireland took on functions in the community that were almost county council-like in its role. It did things like pay for night watchmen, upkeep roads, look after poor relief. And so we'll find records of these totally non-religious things within Church of Ireland records, parish records at times. And then the very sad part of it being the established church is that records were public property. And the result of that, as I'm sure many of you know, is that in the late 19th century, Church of Ireland parishes were asked to send their older registers into the Public Records Office for safekeeping. And unfortunately, in the Public Records Office in 1922, they were destroyed in the fire at the time there. Not all parishes submitted their records, but upwards of about 500 collections of parish records were lost in that fire. Going back anyway to the sort of history of the Church of Ireland in Ireland, traditionally its greatest membership was around the Dublin and surrounds, or the area we know as the Pale, and in Ulster, with, shall we use the word success, limited success in converting Anglo-Hibernian and native Irish in the rest of the country. The Church of Ireland was disestablished or ceased to be the state church in January 1871, so it no longer had state support, and it stood on its own feet after that. After partition from 1922, the Church of Ireland remained an all-island body, a 32-county body. I've already mentioned the disaster of the Public Records Office in 1922. The Church of Ireland today is administered by a body called the Representative Church Body, who I'll be referring to as RCB from now on in the lecture. And under the wing of the RCB comes the Library and Archives of the RCB, which is a resource, it's based in Churchtown in Dublin. And everybody who has an interest in family history research needs to get friendly with the RCB library, because you'll be in there plenty. During this lecture, I'm not going to talk about what I might call basic records, such as civil registration of births, marriages and deaths, or census records, but there's maybe 2 points I'd like to touch on before I leave them behind. First of all, taking the census returns. If you're looking for Church of Ireland people on it, they may not be described as Church of Ireland. They're often, and more often, probably described as Irish Church, sometimes just as IC. So watch those 2 initials, that what you thought was RC might actually be IC. Sometimes you'll see Church of Ireland people described as Anglican and sometimes Episcopalian. And then one little point I also want to make about civil registration of births, marriages and deaths is marriages. From general registration commenced in Ireland in 1864, but for non-Roman Catholic marriages, civil registration, as in state registration, began in 1845. So that, for anyone searching Church of Ireland ancestors or any non-Catholic marriages, it almost gives you a generation of a shoe-in backwards. And it's always worth remembering that when you're doing your research, that you're actually looking for those state marriage records with the names of the father of the bride and groom from 1845 rather than 1864. Now, I want to talk a little bit about population numbers as well. And I have here a little chart showing the census of 2016 as compared to the census of 1861. I'm sorry now that these screens are small and I hope you can see them, but needless to say, they're not directly comparable, because 1861 contains 32 counties and 2016 is 26 counties. But you can see that the Church of Ireland population in 1861 was 12%, and by 2016, it's actually only 2.7% of the overall population. Now, some of that's obviously accounted for by the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, but not all of it. And we'll take a look at another population number slide that I have here. You can see the lighter, almost bluey brown represents Ulster in 1861, and recent is the 6 counties, and the darker brown is other provinces, as in the rest of the Republic of Ireland. The 1861 census is the state 1861 census statistics. Would that it survived, but it didn't. But we do have statistics, and the recent numbers come from an internal Church of Ireland survey or census. But we can see, well, maybe we can't see. Once upon a time, we could see that in 1861, in the 3 provinces of Connaught, Leinster and Munster, there was over 302,000 members of the Church of Ireland. In the recent census, there are there are only 126,000. Now, again, we have a 3-county discrepancy, but it doesn't explain the significant fall in numbers. Some of it, a little bit of it is those 3 counties. Some more of it will be outward emigration. Smaller family numbers will account for it, but also the Ne Temere decree, which was enforced from, I think, 1907 to 1970, whereby if there was a mixed marriage, to get dispensation from the Roman Catholic Church, the couple had to agree to bring up children Roman Catholic. And that becomes quite interesting, actually. Apologies, I can see a glare on my screen. That becomes interesting because what we find all the time is that many people start out researching a Roman Catholic family, go a couple of generations back, and very quickly realize that they have a Church of Ireland line in their family to research. And we find that all the time in the advisory service in the National Archives. It's quite interesting. Those figures hide another aspect, and that's huge variations on a county by county basis. In 1861, 21% of Dublin was Church of Ireland.
Hi, Sandra, sorry, I stopped you for 1 second.
Yes.
See on the top right-hand screen of your screen there, where it's X minus and obviously the little square. If you click on the square and see if that maximizes your screen for me, if you don't mind, just for the view. So see in the top right-hand corner of your screen, yeah.
Oh, that improves it. Does that improve it to you?
Slightly. Yeah.
Okay. It definitely improves it a little bit. This is the last screen where it's going to be, there's going to be very much small print.
Yeah, perfect, no problem.
So, hopefully. Now I've lost my own picture, it doesn't matter. Ah, there we go. And I've moved a screen forward before I wanted to. So looking at the rest of the country, Cork had 8% of a Church of Ireland population, Clare had 2%. Other counties with high numbers would have been Wicklow at 17.7% in 1861, Laois, Offaly, Kildare and Carlow, no surprises there, 10%. Dublin's very interesting. It means that in 1861, 1 in 5 of the population of Dublin was Church of Ireland. That's why particularly so many Dublin people who have only ever known their family as Roman Catholic do their research and find a Church of Ireland line. Not at all unusual. So we'll move forward. That's what I wanted to say about background and population. And we'll take a look at records generated by parishes themselves. And the most important of these, of course, are the church registers of baptism, marriage and burial. A little bit of background on these. The 46th canon, which is a law of the Irish Church in 1634, required that in every parish, church and chapel within this realm shall be provided with one parchment book at the charge of the parish, wherein shall be written the day and year of every christening, wedding and burial. Well, if only every parish had indeed commenced keeping its registers in 1634, how wonderful that would be indeed. Unfortunately, even for those parishes who survived the 1922 fire by not sending their records to Dublin, really the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century is more the normal to expect to find parish registers beginning. Actually, the earliest is St. John's in Dublin, which was earlier than that, 1634. They have registers from 1619, which are published, but I think it's a little sketchy in the early years. Early registers for parishes were what we call combined registers. And that meant that the one single book was used to record baptisms, marriages and burials. Generally, you might find, say, baptisms in the front, marriages in the middle and burials at the end. But I have seen combined registers where you could have a marriage on one line, a burial on the next, 2 baptisms and another burial. And it's your job to try and figure out which line means which. From the 1820s, 1830s, parishes began to introduce what we call pro forma registers. Pro forma means that the registers were pre-printed and pre-lined, and the headings of what was to go into them was pre-designated, if you like, and things improved much better in terms of standards of what we get out of the registers from that point. As I said before, all of those registers were the property of the state because the Church of Ireland was the established church. The next change to the rules that would have taken place was from 1845, as I said, state registration of non-Catholic marriages commenced. It was the church's responsibility to register those marriages with the state. So the marriage registers it began to keep had to contain all the details that would then be transferred onto the state registers of the marriage certificates as we would know them. And so the marriage register kept in the church belonged to the General Register Office and was essentially the exact same format and layout as a General Register Office record. After 1871, after disestablishment, baptism and burial records were the property of each individual parish. The marriage register continued to be the property of the General Register Office. Now, what I want to do now is take a look at each of the 3 types of registers where they separate baptism, marriage and burial, and we'll have a look at some examples of each as well. So before the introduction of pro forma registers, the baptism registers would contain very, very little information. Sometimes you'd get no more than the date of the baptism and the name and surname of the child. There's a number of differences between Church of Ireland registers and Roman Catholic parish registers for any of you who might be familiar with Roman Catholic registers. First up, Church of Ireland registers are always in English and never in Latin. Second up, And this is the sad one from our point of view. While Roman Catholic registers usually recorded the maiden name of the mother, Church of Ireland registers almost never recorded the maiden name of the mother of the child. This is a very early pro forma baptism register from the parish of St. Catherine's in Dublin from 1786. And just to give you an example of how little information is recorded on it, take a look over on the left-hand side in the middle, christenings in August 1786, line 1, 1st of August, Mary Toole, daughter of Oliver and Mary. That is it. That is all the information that you're getting from that register. You do not know where she lives, which of many Mary Tooles she might be, or anything like that. Then we move on to pro forma registers. This is an example from St. Peter's in Dublin from 1852, and you can see the headings that are preset into the book. We're asked when the child was baptized, when born, the child's Christian name, the parents' names, Christian name and surname. Note, there's no column for mother's maiden name. Then we get the abode of the child, which is extremely helpful, and we get the quality trade or profession of the father. So we get a whole lot more information out of the registers once they went pro forma, I should say, from about 1820s, 1830s in general. In terms of marriage registers, much the same story, minimal information before pro forma registers were introduced. Often you would only get the name of the couple and the date that the marriage took place on. The early pro forma registers, which didn't last very long, really only from about the 1820s to 1845, introduced a few new questions to be filled in. It was asked whether a marriage was by license or banns, and I'm going to explain that because we're going to meet marriage licenses again a couple of times. Obviously, a marriage wasn't just a religious ceremony. A marriage actually had significant legal implications in terms of property and such. So it had to be proved that a person was validly entitled to be married, and that could be done in one of two ways. There could be the reading of banns for 3 Sundays before the marriage in the church, or else a marriage license could be taken out by an interested party. And a marriage license was a sworn bond with a surety amount on it, and it was a substantial amount. And you would not swear such a bond lightly. If it turned out that the couple were not eligible to be married, were not free to be married, you who took out that marriage license could be liable for the amount on the bond. It wasn't something taken lightly. Now, those marriage licenses would be a wonderful thing indeed if they survived, but of course they were a victim to the 1922 fire. However, calendars or lists of the people who took out licenses do still survive. The other thing that was introduced to the pro forma marriage registers was the names of witnesses to the marriage, which can give us more family names, and also the parish that the marriage parties came from. Not the actual addresses, but at least the parish they came from was some sort of a help. And as I said earlier, from 1845, the register in the church was a replica of the format we know of as the General Register marriage certificate style. Again, I want to show you a couple of examples. First up, this is a register from St. Mark's in 1813. And you can see the first entry by banns, John Blacker, Mary Lawson, November 25th, 1812. That is it. That is the height of the information that you're getting. Moving on into the pro forma era, here's one from St. George's in Dublin from 1834. And we can see that Thomas French Lawrence came from the parish of St. Thomas in Dublin. We don't know where in St. Thomas's, but at least we know he was from St. Thomas's. And his bride was Sidney Jane Clark of this parish. So we know she's from St. George's parish. We're married in this church by license with consent of parents, and we get the names of, it says in the presence of, which are the names of the witnesses to the marriage. So a little bit more information with the typical pro forma register. From 1845, this is an example of one from St. Thomas's in Dublin. And for any of you familiar with a marriage certificate or the state marriage record, you'll realize it's exactly identical, contains all sorts of good information, occupations, fathers' names, addresses at time of marriage, etc. Burial records, same scenario exactly. Before pro forma registers, you generally only got the name of the person who was deceased and the date of the burial. Sometimes you might get an address, sometimes you might get an age of the deceased person, and sometimes you even got a relationship, such as John, son of William. So then at least you knew that John was a child. It's very hard to tell anything about from the early registers that give very little information. Pro forma registers added the age of death and the address of the deceased. And as I mentioned earlier, always watch for Roman Catholic burials in Church of Ireland registers. And if you want to know if they're there or not, if it's a bulky burial register by compared to the baptism register, then it contains Roman Catholic burials as well. Here's an example from St. Mark's in 1787. If you have a look, August the 1st, Edward size. That's it. That's the sum of your information. When we go to pro forma registers, this one is St. Mark's again in 1844. And you can see name, abode, when buried, age, and by whom the ceremony was performed. In this case, actually, the by whom the ceremony was performed is interesting. The first two lines just say RC, which means they were Roman Catholic burials in St. Mark's ground. The third one for Sarah Lister was done by Eugene O'Mara, who was a Church of Ireland clergyman. So where do we find these registers? Well, obviously, and unfortunately, as I said earlier, at least 500 collections, something over a third of them anyway, were lost in the fire in 1922. Of the survivors, the most likely place to find them is the RCB Library in Braemar Park in Churchtown. And I have a little photograph of the reading room in the RCB Library there, you can see. And just, well, I think to mention it, if any of you have an interest in Huguenot or have Huguenot ancestors, the RCB Library also holds the Huguenot archive. The National Archives here have many microfilm copies of the registers that are in the RCB Library. Some remain in local custody. Remember that those before 1870, from 1870 back, are public property. PRONI, the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland, has collections of original registers and has microfilm of almost all registers that survive for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, plus quite a lot of adjoining counties as well. And of course, there's records online, which I'll come back to. Now, that's all very fine to know where they might be, but how do we know where you'll find a specific set of registers for a specific parish that you're looking for? And that's where the RCB Library have come into their own. They prepared this great big chart of every parish in the country, listed out what records it has, and color coded it as to where they are. And I'll just show you that now. This is the front page of it. And you can see parishes marked in yellow means that the registers, the original registers, are in the RCB Library. Grey means that they were lost in the fire in 1922. Green means that they were lost in the fire in 1922, but that there is some surviving coverage or alternative sources, maybe copies made. Purple is PRONI. Do you see down the middle, there's a set of M's? That means that there's microfilm of that register in the National Archives, which can be very handy. If you're doing research in town, you might want to have to go out to Churchtown. Now, the other thing I want to bring to your attention here, if you look at those parishes, particularly the parishes in yellow, you'll see that there's a blue line under the parish name. That blue line is a hyperlink. And if you click that hyperlink on any given parish, it'll give you a full list of what registers there are and what other records they have from that parish. And we'll come back to the other possible records there may be. That's just the example of the front page of that chart from the RCB Library, where you can see the color coding. Let's move on to talking about accessing Church of Ireland parish records online. First up, we have the state-sponsored website, irishgenealogy.ie, free website. It covers most surviving Dublin, Carlow and some Kerry parishes. often carries images of the original register. There is the subscription website Roots Ireland, which will cost up to €225 a year. And it is, again, a searchable database and contains a certain and decent number of Church of Ireland parishes around the country. There is a substantial amount of County Antrim and County Down parishes transcribed on ancestryireland.com. The RCB Library themselves have a thing called the Anglican Record Project, which is, they've transcribed a couple of parishes. Killucan in Westmeath is a good example. They're rather nice transcriptions. They're not particularly name searchable, but you can flick through them almost like looking at a register, and they give commentary on the condition of the book as well, which is important. In 2018, our government announced that there would be a grant to the RCB Library to digitise their entire collection. I've no idea how it's going. I'm quite sure that COVID put the kibosh on it for the time being. Now, I do want to talk to you about, obviously there's great advantages of looking, searching for somebody online, but there are also disadvantages. And the disadvantages really are, you don't know how complete a set of records you're looking at online. You don't know if the person you're searching for might have been baptized, married, buried in a parish that was lost in 1922. You don't know if you're looking for, if indeed the parish, even if it survives, is included in the online database. And you don't know how good the register was that the information's coming from. Are there big gaps perhaps in the register that you don't know about if you're looking online? And I want to show you an example of Dunamore Parish in County Wicklow. It's a parish that's kind of near and dear to me because most of my mother's family came from there. And based on their ages on their death records, an entire sort of line on my family tree of ancestors should have been baptized in Dunamore between about 1798 and 1810. Roots Ireland says it has baptisms for Dunamore Parish for 1720 to 1900. But not for the life of me could I find the baptisms of that entire line of ancestors of mine. So I took myself into the RCB library where I was allowed to look at the original register. And here's what I found. It'll be a little bit difficult to read, so I've transcribed it below, but it says, the greater part of the old parish registry, having been in leaves and decayed by age, and some few of them short, we, the rector and church wardens of the parish of Dunamore, employed Thomas Lambert, the county clerk, to transcribe what was legible and remaining of the old book into the new one, and paid him for his trouble. The book is imperfect as parts of the old one have been lost or broken, but we believe that the new one contains nothing but what was in the old. Well, Roots Ireland never told me when I was looking at it that all I was looking at was a transcription, and an incomplete transcription at that. Looking at Roots Ireland, I would never know that there was a problem with the records for the entire 18th century that I was looking at in Dunamore. And we go on. Nothing has been registered in the old book during the year 1799 by means of the insurrection which raged through the county that year. Little or nothing has been registered in 1800, also through the same cause is supposed. This little piece comes from the burial register, but there's something similar in the baptism register. There's an interval of 8 years, of which time not the least account of the burials is to be had. In the beginning of the year 1809, William Phillips, the parish clerk, died, being old, deaf, and debilitated for some years, from which causes many defects in this book has arisen. So now I know why I couldn't find that baptisms for that line of ancestors of mine. But the problem is, people don't think to find out what condition the registers that they're looking for people in may be in. And what you'll see all the time is family trees on things like Ancestry and My Heritage, whereby great leaps of faith are taken, and they, in this instance, what they might have is the children, they'd have baptisms for the children of this missing generation. And they'll place parents onto them who are kind of 50 or 60 years old at the time the children were supposed to be born. They'll skip a generation and look for the names they want and just bang in what they can. So I would always urge people researching, in fact, any denomination, but in particular Church of Ireland, to try and lay hands on the original registers if they can, so that you know what condition the register was in that you're looking at. my finding is that Church of Ireland parish registers are riddled with gaps. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about, I want to move from registers and talk about vestry minute books. So what are vestry minute books? Well, we'll start off with what's the vestry in the first place. The general vestry are all the adult members of a parish who are entitled to vote at the Easter General Vestry meeting. The Easter General Vestry meeting, you can think of it as an annual general meeting. And at that annual general meeting, a committee is selected to look after the affairs, the administration fabric of the parish for the year to come. That committee is called the Select Vestry. Minutes are kept, both of the Easter vestry appointments and the annual accounts. And every time the Select Vestry meets, minutes are also supposed to be kept of their meetings. The minutes tend to be in the same book as each other. Now, I'd love to tell you that they're the most exciting things in the world, and you're going to find out every little bit of gossip about everything that was happening in the parish and every parishioner, but you're not. They tend to be a little bit dry. They tend to be about parish accounts, about repairs on the church, about applications, assessed taxes, rather than information about the parishioners. But that doesn't mean that we dismiss them as genealogists, because there are reasons that our ancestors will appear in vestry minutes. They may be elected to that select vestry or given another position, such as a warden or treasurer or secretary in the parish. Sometimes you might find them named as being paid for a task. Sometimes you'll find them when there's items included in the vestry minutes that don't strictly belong in the vestry minutes. The kind of things you might find are cess records, but tithe tax records, I mean, really. Pew records. Pew records are lovely things. They're whereby parishioners pay to have a pew designated specially in the church for them. And the nearer the front, the pew, the more they paid for it. So you can actually, where there's pew records, you can tell who was wealthy and who wasn't. I've seen local census information in vestry minutes. Sometimes confirmation register information is included in the vestry minutes. Sometimes actually it can be included in combined registers. I've even seen mention of burials in vestry minutes. So they're always worth a look. And worst case scenario, they can be a last resort confirmation of someone's whereabouts. For instance, if we have a situation of you think somebody might have lived in such and such a parish, but you can find no other record of them. And unfortunately, that's a parish where who lost its records in 1922. Go to the vestry minutes book. You might get lucky. You might find that person has been selected to a committee, paid for a task, or that there's something in the vestry minutes book that doesn't actually belong in vestry minutes that mention your ancestor. So I often call them a last resort confirmation of someone's whereabouts. Where do we find these vestry minute books? Some remain in local custody, but most are in the RCB library. And for Northern Ireland, start with Prony. Prony have a list of parishes, which would be civil parishes in Northern Ireland. And within each of those, they list all the churches or parishes that are within it and what records they hold for them. You can find that on their website. And again, the RCB library website has a specific list of vestry minutes, but the easiest way is just to use that overall chart of parishes and parish records. Click the hyperlink under any parish name and it will tell you what vestry minutes the RCB library has for that parish. Now, church registers and vestry minute books aren't the only genealogical records of interest that a church may actually, a parish may have actually generated down the years. There are other types of records. Again, to find out what there might be for a parish, so long as it's in the RCB library, you can click that hyperlink under the parish names. But the kind of things that you might find: registers of vestrymen, cess tax books, confirmation registers, school records, Sunday school records, records of organizations and societies. I love those because sometimes family history can be bare and it can be just all about names and dates and places. But when you start getting information about what organizations or societies your ancestor might have been involved in, it puts a color to them. You can find registers of bands and then pictures of photos from the parish at times even as well. One I think we should always watch out for is a thing called the preacher's book. Some of you might already know what they are, but effectively they're a record of the services held in the church. They would be normally expected to give the date of the service, the type of service, as in communion, morning prayer, evening prayer, number of communicants, and a sign off by whatever clergyman did the service. But there's an observations column in the right-hand side of those preachers' books. And just sometimes they might record that there was a baptism of so-and-so in the service, or they might note that the service was a burial service for so-and-so. Now, if we're talking about a parish that lost its records in its proper registers, shall we say, in 1922, that preacher's book could be a godsend. You could find something in that you've no other proof of otherwise. I'm just going to show you a tiny snippet from the hyperlink of St. George's Parish in Dublin to give you a feel for the kind of things you might have. Up the top, we can see that there's some schools records, and there's a massive list of organizations and societies, including YMCA library registers. There's a charitable loan society, a coal fund minute book. Both of them would give information on poorer members of the parish. And that's something we often find hard to find, is records of the poorer side of the Church of Ireland community. There's plenty of records of the titled and the very wealthy and the landed, not so many records of the poorer communities. There's a mother's meeting ledger there. Again, women, hard to find in records at times, hard to find much to give colour to their lives. And then there's there's a youth social club, Guild of Youth registers. Lovely to get records of people from their youth. So I would always say, if there's a parish you're interested in, see what other records there might be, as well as the registers and the vestry minute books. At that, I want to leave behind records that are generated by parishes themselves and move on to other forms of records that are of interest to anyone researching Church of Ireland families. I want to stay with the RCB library though. They have a magnificent manuscript collection. Last time I had a look at what they had 1,125 individual collections of manuscripts. And the catalogue of them, which is available on their website, is 184 pages long. Types of things you might find: papers of various national or diocesan associations, committees and councils, various family papers, not of much interest unless it's the specific family that you're looking at, legal documents, parish histories, extracts from items later destroyed in the 1922 fire. For instance, Tennyson Groves made extracts of wills, which were then lost in the 1922 fire, and they're available in the RCB library. Records of the Protestant Orphan Society papers, Bethany Home and Mead Industrial School are in that collection. Now, obviously they're restricted, but it doesn't mean that you can't apply for information, and then clergy letters and sermons. I've selected out a couple of interesting ones that caught my fancy over that 184-page catalogue. There's a small number of marriage license records from Ossory, which all they do really is make us sad for what was lost in the 1922 fire. A register for Tipperary County Infirmary, given names, addresses, age, doctor complaint, dates of admission and discharge or death. It's not many times you can get records like that. There's the papers of the Church of Ireland Temperance Society, which I'm sure are an enjoyable read. The Island and Coast Society is most definitely an enjoyable read, and they were published. They're all about a missionary society that tried to establish Protestantism in outlying seaboard parishes in the west of Ireland and islands of the west of Ireland. And their annual reports are wonderful. It's all about, we persuaded 5 Roman Catholic children to join our school. Then the next year, regrettably, the local parish priest enticed 6 of our children back to the Roman Catholic school. So it's really enjoyable to read. There is records of the Church of Ireland Labour Home and Yard in Ringsend from 1899 to provide work for the deserving unemployed, and minutes and admissions books for the Harcourt Home for aged single females from 1838. There aren't many places that you get records of aged single females, I'm afraid. So I think that manuscript collection is very interesting. The Church of Ireland Gazette is the magazine of the Church of Ireland community. It came out first in 1856 as a monthly and then weekly from 1880. The RCB library holds all back copies, but better than that, they have it digitized and word searchable right from the beginning through, to the best of my knowledge, to 2010. Again, I'd love to tell you that it's full of birth, marriage and death information on every parishioner in every parish in the country, but it isn't. It's more about church thinking and theology. But that's not to say there aren't, shall we say, items of genealogical interest in the Church of Ireland Gazette. There are. You'll often get lists of donors to a cause, appointments of clergy, if you happen to have a clergyman ancestor. Sunday school exam results is one that you're more likely than anything to find your ancestors within. The other thing you'd have is lots of adverts for products or businesses or people seeking positions. And of course, they're all going to be Church of Ireland people who pay to place their adverts in the Church of Ireland Gazette. And then the other thing of interest is lists of people attending various society and committee meetings. Again, interesting and useful. For any of you who do have Church of Ireland clergy as their actual ancestors, Canon J.B. Leslie prepared biographies of all clergy who were in what's called a benefice position, as in they had a parish position rather than, say, something like a hospital position or a position with a mission. These books, they're arranged, they're books by diocese, 2 parts, little biographies in 1 part and lists of who the clergy in each parish in the diocese were in the 2nd part. And they're available in the RCB library and here actually at the National Archives and various other libraries also. I'm not going to go into detail as to what's in them. They're slightly niche, shall we say. It's not everyone who has a clergyman ancestor, but I'd just like you to be aware that they do exist. Now, one I mentioned earlier is the marriage licenses, and I myself can like them quite a little bit. They can fill in a gap for us for all the little bit we have of them. As I said before, the actual marriage licenses were lost in 1922, and all that survives is calendars. Calendars give the year the license was sought, the name of the prospective groom and prospective bride, and it sounds like very little. But what we have to remember is so many Church of Ireland parishes were lost, had their actual, say, their early marriage records lost in 1922, and baptism records don't give mothers' maiden names for children. So I'll just give you a little example from my own family history. Starting at about 1830, a John and Rachel Plant had a line of children, but I had no idea who Rachel was. What was her maiden name? It wasn't going to be given to me on the baptism registers. And I could not find a marriage record, a church register record for the marriage of John and Rachel. I'm going to assume they were from Donna in Wicklow. I'm assuming that they must have married in a nearby parish who lost its records in 1922, possibly Baltinglass. But in 1828, in the marriage license calendars, there's an entry for a John Plant and a Rachel Kelly. The year is right. How many John Plant and Rachel marriages can there have been? I can't believe it's anything but my family. And I was speaking to my late uncle about it, and he said, yeah, I remember that there was Kelly somewhere in our family. And he didn't remember that when I first spoke to him about our family history, but with the little prompter, he was able to remember it and confirm it for me. So for me, I personally found marriage licenses very useful, and I've had that same scenario repeat for clients as well, whereby the marriage license calendar gave us that clue as to who the woman was. They are available on the National Archives genealogy website, and they're also obviously available on microfilm in the National Archives, and they're also available on the subscription website Find My Past. School records are always of interest to everybody, not the least people in the Church of Ireland. Most Church of Ireland schools would have been part of the national education system that was established in 1832. And as such, each of those schools will have records of their interactions with the state in the National Archives. Most of it is only really of interest for church or parish history, local history rather than family history. There are salary books for teachers if anybody has teaching staff in their ancestors. What we would really like as genealogists are admissions registers, as in school registers or school roll books that actually name all the children in the school. Sadly, not a lot of them survive. There are some. The National Archives has a set under the private accessions. You can find the link to what parish, what schools they have on their website. The other place to look is the schools themselves and county libraries. County libraries have begun in earnest now really to try and collect in records. In terms of secondary schools, there's a number of very long established Church of Ireland secondary schools in the country, and as such, many of them actually have archives. I know particularly that King's Hospital and High School in Dublin have very, very extensive archives. High School also has Erasmus archives as a matter of interest. So I would always say, if you think that one of your ancestors might have gone to one of those schools, check out and see if there's a school archive. You would be astounded at the level of information that might be held if you're lucky enough. That to me is hidden gold genealogy wise, if you can find somebody in those particular school archives. The other aspect of education, of course, is Trinity College, which was almost exclusively a Protestant university for most of its lifetime in Ireland. The book Alumni Dublensis, which I can never pronounce properly, I'll apologise, is an admissions register of students, graduates and professors of Trinity College, which, if you get the second edition, spans 1593 to 1860. And I would always urge everybody reading it to read. There's a fairly substantial introduction, but read it, because you won't actually understand the entry for your potential ancestor unless you do. There's so much code word in it that you really do need to read it. It's available in many libraries. It's available in hard copy in the National Archives. It's available digitally on Trinity's digital collection, and it's also available name searchable through Find My Past. Again, well worth a look. Burial grounds. I'm moving rather rapidly through because I'm expecting my time approaching the end call coming shortly.
No, not at all. Take your time.
Oh, grand. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll just have a look myself. Oh, yes, it's coming up to 7 o'clock. I will speed up.
Take your time, no rush.
Mount Jerome was the main burial ground for Church of Ireland community in Dublin. Pearse Street Library, or Dublin City Library, I should properly call it, has burial registers from 1836 with an index. There are headstone transcriptions. Now, remember, of course, not everybody who was buried had a headstone, but for those who had a headstone, there are headstone inscriptions and photographs on the IGP web project. When you go into that, it looks like you're just seeing photographs of the tombstones, but if you look up top left, you'll see a blue hyperlink saying text file. If you click that, you'll get text of the information on those headstones, and you can press Control F on your keyboard and word search. Now it's specific letters, word search that for the people you're looking for. Another good source of information, Dr. Michael Egan and Richard Flatman there was about 10 volumes compiled of their memorials of the dead for Dublin City and County. And as there's a high Church of Ireland population in Dublin City and County, this is a useful book. Likewise, Brian Cantwell's Memorials of the Dead, covering Wicklow and pretty much all of Wicklow and Wexford, is of great interest to Church of Ireland researchers, because again, large Church of Ireland populations in those counties. Those are available on Find My Past. They're name searchable on Find My Past. And likewise, the Ulster Historical Foundation's website, ancestryireland.com, will have plenty of burials or headstone transcriptions for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. Last but not least, I would just want to run a few random sources by you. Unsurprisingly, plenty of people in the Church of Ireland may have been members of the Freemasons or the Orange Order. don't have much information about researching through the Orange Order, but the Freemasons are surprisingly helpful indeed. I've a couple of times got information from them. They're far from secret. They're actually very obliging and very helpful with their information. So if you think that you have an ancestor who may have been in the Freemasons, well worth contacting them. They have records of financial support to widows as well, which can be very interesting. The next resource is a little beauty. It's something that's kept in the National Archives. It's called the Charlton Endowment Charitable Trust Fund Marriage Certificates. And I know that's an awful mouthful. Covers 1800 to 1937 and the counties of Meath and Longford by and large. And I will take a minute, and I'm sorry for holding everybody up, but I will take a little minute to tell you the background of this trust fund because it's rather wonderful. It concerns a very wealthy estate owner from Curratown in County Meath, who lived from 1702 to 1792. When he was 75 years old, he, I think the best word is embarked on a second marriage, much to the disgust of his original first family. And the story goes that his members of his first family, and I quote, took steps to ensure he would never have more children on the night of his marriage. Well, he was so angry with his first family that he promptly wrote a new will to disinherit them and set up a trust fund to support the cause of true love. And what it allowed was that sons of day labourers in County Meath and County Longford could apply to this fund for quite a substantial grant at the time of their marriage to give them a shoe along the road, give them a help out. The estate which he left to the trust was very valuable. It generated, I suppose, more money down the years than anyone ever expected. And with that, loads of people applied. There are a couple of thousand applications for money from it. And those applications are what we call those marriage certificates, and they're informative. Because if you think the person applying had to prove that they were married, they had to prove, so they had to give the date of marriage, their name, some family information, and their occupation to prove that they were in the poorer classes. And those certificates survive and they're available here in the National Archives. And so if you have poorer Meath or Longford Church of Ireland ancestors, in actual fact, interestingly, there was a short period of time where they even made grants to Roman Catholic married couples as well. Well worth having a look. Catholic qualification and convert rolls, well, that was records at the local courts of people who converted from Roman Catholicism to the established Church of Ireland to avoid the provisions of the penal laws. There's lists available on the National Archives genealogy website, which is, you'll find it, the census forms part of that same website set. I don't like using that website for this particular set of records. I find it better to actually go into the National Library and get the book version there, because you can tell more easily what court the conversion was, and it's the nearest thing to an address you're getting. The next 4 things I've set out on this are in no way specific to Church of Ireland families, but because there's a general slant of wealthier families in the Church of Ireland as an average in the population, matters in the Registry of Deeds, the Genealogical Office, wills, and occupation records like Law Society, medical, Royal College of Surgeons, etc. Always remember them when you're doing research on Church of Ireland ancestors. I don't have the time. They're entire lectures of their own, each of those, but just for those of you who might have heard of them, bear them in mind. For those of you who haven't heard of them, I couldn't do better than suggest getting John Grenham's Tracing Your Irish Ancestors and reading up about them. The very last thing before we go to questions and answers I want to bring up is the Guild of One Name Studies. It's not a resource, it's actually a genealogical society. But as most of you will observe, many people in the Church of Ireland have unusual surnames. And what the Guild of One Name Studies is a British Isles society dedicated to collecting, whereby its members who have an interest in a particular surname can join in, blanket recording every instance of that surname that they can find. So if you have an unusual surname, I'd say first thing, go off to have a look at the Guild of One Name Studies website and see if your name is included there. Now, always remember, of course, that it's user transcriptions, and of course there can be errors, and sometimes you can't always tell clearly where they got their information, but it can be very useful. I have the surname Knaggs in my Knaggs in my own family tree, and they're included in One Name Studies, and there's quite a lot of transcribed records for them there. So with that, I hand back and we'll have questions and answers time. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Sandra, if we could just ask you to stop sharing
Yes.
your screen there, please. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I have to.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, sorry, I have to figure that one out. Here. Apologies.
It's okay. I can stop it myself here.
Yeah, I think you might have to, Elizabeth. Yeah, I can. Yeah, okay. Apologies.
Not at all, Sandra. Thank you very, very much. Well, on behalf of the audience and the National Archives, Sandra, I'd just like to thank you very, very much for that absorbing presentation. We do have some time for Q&A. The Q&A box has been busy throughout the talk, so I will just pick a few here. They're not too tricky, because I'm conscious of the fact that you have spoken for quite a while now, but there were one or two queries here. There's a lady who was inquiring about her great-grandmother. When she was born, she, well, yeah, obviously she was still a minor. Her first child was born in 1887. There's no trace of a civil marriage record. Great-grandfather's parish of origin is unknown. Did the Church of Ireland have the same tradition of recording marriages of people born in the parish on the baptismal register as the Catholic Church did?
I have never actually seen it. That's not to say it may not have happened.
Okay.
Yeah, simple as that. I can't say I've ever actually seen it. And I know what the questioner is asking. I've seen them often on Roman Catholic registers, but I'm afraid I never have seen such an annotation on the side of Church of Ireland register. And that's not to say that there aren't some somewhere, but I've not seen them.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. There's another query about the minimum age for those getting married, and did this age change over time?
It did. In the past, to the best of my knowledge, it was 18 with parental consent, and then once you were 21, which was full age, you were free.
Okay. There's a question about the Guild book. Will the library loan via Kindle? So the Guild book, perhaps that you were referring to earlier, just this query, the questioner is wondering about, is that available as a library loan on Kindle? I'm
not sure what book we mean by the Guild book, I'm afraid, or what library do we mean, the National Library? I'm not.
That's okay. The person who asked that question, perhaps if they just want to clarify that.
Yeah. If we're talking about something in the National Library, I'm not aware of them ever having digital shares of what they have.
Okay, great. Is there any way of noting from a marriage record which of the party were Church of Ireland where a mixed marriage was suspected?
No, there isn't, unfortunately. I'd love to say that there is, but there isn't. The surname itself is probably the best giveaway that you're going to get.
Okay, the person who asked the inquiry, made the inquiry about the Guild, they have since clarified. Yeah, the Guild of One Name Studies.
Now, it's a society, it's not a book. So the Guild of One Name Studies has a website and you can join as a member, but even if you're not joined, you can have a look at the names on their website and see if the name you're interested in is in that list. I would say if the name you're interested in is in their list, then I would join. It's not dear, and you can access the information that they hold on that name.
Okay, let's just check if there's any more Any other further queries? People saying thank you very much. You know, very, very good talk. I know we experienced some IT glitches earlier on.
Yes, I apologize.
No, not at all. But at the same time, I know people can understand that, you know, best laid plans and glitches happen. So thanks everybody also.
It was my own fault. I thought I had an idea to increase the screen size and it went rather disastrously wrong, but I suppose we got there.
Not at all, not at all. You know, there, but for the grace of God, I think a lot of us have been in those positions in Zoom over the last two years or so. So, you know, people do understand when these things happen. So thank you very much, Sandra. Ladies here, thanks for such an interesting presentation. I've looked at my own parish records, but have lots of other sources now to check out, which is
that's exactly what I hoped. That's exactly what I hoped from this lecture, that people can move on a few steps further with the research. They've got some new ideas, and that there'll be lots of excitement going forward to do a little bit of additional research on everyone's families.
No, you've certainly given us all food for thought, and certainly plenty of new avenues to explore, which is exactly what all these talks are about. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sandra. I'd also like to thank our audience who have tuned in, certainly from the addresses, the email addresses when registering. We have quite an international audience with us this evening. Just a few words about our next online talk, which will take place on the 12th of May. It will be given by Mr. Justice John Hedigan on the National Archives, the Memory of the Nation. Now, what's nice or would be interesting about that particular event is that it's going to be hosted in the Court of Appeal in the Four Courts Complex, which is where the former reading room and the treasury of the Public Record Office of Ireland, now the National Archives, one of the legacy bodies or the predecessor bodies of the National Archives. So the National Archives Advisory Council Chair, Mr. Justice Hedigan, will be talking about the National Archives as the memory of the nation. There will be some members of the National Archives Advisory Council on a panel. So even though there will be a small physical audience there, we will of course be streaming it live. We'll be issuing a save the date about that tomorrow, and then registration will open after the bank holiday weekend. So we will be very much welcoming people and encouraging people to sign up for that, because I think it's also part, of course, of the National Archives program of events as part of the overall contribution to the decade of centenaries. Have we any more? Yeah, no, plenty of thank yous coming in.
Thank you.
And one or two other questions, but I think you have more than given of your time and your expertise tonight, Sandra. Thank you very much. And to all of you, thanks again for tuning in. We'll be making the recording available on our website, and we'll flag that on our YouTube channel, but particularly also on our Twitter account. So thank you all for joining us. I wish you all a very nice evening from Dublin. Gur mila mahagwib agus slán go fóg ihuwa. Thank you.
Thank you.